On a freezing Montana night, a wild white stallion slams its hooves against a rancher's barn door, begging to be let in. What the rancher discovers inside changes everything, a half-dead boy clutching a secret powerful enough to tear a valley apart. From that storm onward, man, boy, and horse are bound together, facing rumors, soldiers, and betrayal. But in the end, they may discover something stronger than fear: family. The wind screamed across the Montana highlands like a living thing, bending the pines until they groaned in protest. Snow swirled in frantic spirals, lashing against the windows of Ethan Cole's small ranch house. He stood at the hearth, shoulders hunched, listening to the storm claw at the roof. Nights like this reminded him of field hospitals years ago, when the cries of the dying mixed with the wail of winter winds. He had chosen these mountains for their silence, for the way they allowed grief to fade into the snowdrifts. Yet even here, memories stalked him like wolves. He buttoned his heavy coat, grabbed the lantern, and stepped into the storm. Snow bit at his face, stinging his skin, and the light from the lantern carved trembling tunnels through the white. He muttered to himself about checking the horses, about making sure the roof of the barn held. Then he heard it, a frantic pounding, sharp and desperate against the wooden boards of the stable door. At first Ethan thought it was the wind, but then it came again. A thud, a scrape, the sound of hooves striking wood. His heart gave a hard jolt. He lifted the lantern higher, forcing his eyes to pierce the swirling curtain of snow. Out of the storm staggered a shape that seemed more ghost than flesh. A horse, its coat glazed with ice, mane stiff and heavy with frozen sleet. Its sides heaved, nostrils flaring, and its dark eyes gleamed with wild desperation. The animal pressed against the barn door, striking it with its hoof, over and over, as if demanding to be let in. Wild horses didn't beg humans for shelter. Ethan knew that better than anyone. They fled, they vanished into the timberline. Yet this one was here, pawing and snorting, refusing to be driven back by wind or fear. The sight rooted Ethan to the spot. He could feel the heat of his own breath clouding the freezing air, hear the drum of his pulse louder than the gale. Something about this horse was wrong, or perhaps something was terribly right. "Easy, boy," he called out, though his voice was whipped away by the storm. He moved closer, each step crunching deep into the drifts. The horse didn't rear or flee. It slammed the door again, hooves sparking against the iron latch. The sound carried through the night, a cry for salvation disguised as noise. Ethan's fingers found the latch, stiff with frost. With one hard pull, the barn door swung wide, spilling the scent of hay and warmth into the blizzard. The horse stumbled forward, collapsing onto the straw-strewn floor, its body shaking from exhaustion. The other horses inside snorted and shifted uneasily, eyes rolling at the intrusion, but Ethan barely noticed, for the horse was not alone. From beneath a worn saddle blanket, a body slipped and tumbled into the hay. A boy, no, nearly a man, though still young, rolled onto his side, his face pale and lips blue with cold. His clothes were torn, his chest heaving in shallow, ragged breaths. For an instant, Ethan thought he was dead, but then the boy let out a low, broken groan. The lantern light flickered across his features, high cheekbones, dark hair plastered to his forehead, a copper-toned complexion that spoke of heritage. Ethan recognized instantly. Native. Ethan's breath caught. "Good Lord," he whispered, kneeling beside the boy. He pressed 2 fingers to the youth's throat and found a faint pulse, weak but steady. Snow melted off the boy's shoulders, dripping into the straw. The storm raged outside, rattling the door on its hinges, but in that moment, Ethan felt another kind of storm break open inside him. He had stumbled across a life balanced on the edge of death, and it was now in his hands. The white horse, no. The ghostly creature lifted its head with a feeble whinny. Its dark eyes locked on Ethan's, filled with something more than instinct. Trust, desperation, a plea Ethan could not ignore. "All right," Ethan murmured, voice hoarse against the howl of the blizzard. "All right, you're safe here, both of you." He scooped the boy into his arms, the lantern swinging wildly, and turned toward the ranch house. Snow clung to his beard, to his lashes, but he pressed on, boots sinking knee-deep. Behind him, the horse's faint nicker followed like a vow, carried on the storm's breath. Ethan shoved his shoulder against the cabin door, bursting inside with the frozen weight of the boy. The fire cracked in the hearth, casting long shadows across the wooden walls. He kicked the door shut, heart hammering. For the first time in years, His house held more than silence. It held a mystery and perhaps the beginning of a battle he did not yet understand. The warmth of the cabin hit Ethan like a wall as he staggered inside, boots crunching across the plank floor. He lowered the boy onto the old leather settee near the fire, his breath ragged from the effort. The flames threw shifting light across the boy's face, highlighting skin that was ashen beneath the frost. His lips were tinged blue, and his chest rose in shallow, uneven gulps. Ethan knelt close, shaking the snow from his shoulders, and laid a hand against the boy's skin. Cold as riverstone, too cold. "Stay with me, son," Ethan muttered, though he doubted the youth could hear him. He pulled a wool blanket from the back of a chair, wrapped it around the trembling figure, and pushed the settee closer to the fire. The storm roared beyond the walls, battering the cabin with gusts that made the shutters groan, but inside there was at least a pocket of heat. Ethan leaned forward, coaxing the boy's jaw open, just enough to drip a few sips of water between his cracked lips. The boy coughed, shuddered, then slipped back into silence. It was then that Ethan noticed the satchel, a worn leather pouch, crudely stitched, pressed tight against the boy's chest, as if he had fought to keep it there even in his collapse. The strap was cut, frayed as though by a blade, and the leather bore dark stains of melted snow. Ethan's hand hovered over it, instinct pulling him to investigate, but something in him resisted. He had been a soldier long enough to know when an object carried more weight than its size suggested. Whatever lay inside was not meant for careless hands. The door banged open suddenly, making him whirl. Martha Ellison stood framed in the doorway, snow clinging to her cloak, her breath steaming in the chill. "Lord above, Ethan," she exclaimed, slamming the door shut behind her. "I saw your lantern swinging like a madman out there." "What?" Her eyes fell on the boy. She froze. "Dear heavens, what have you dragged in?" Ethan rose slowly. "Found him under a horse, half dead, couldn't leave him." Martha pulled off her gloves, her hands already moving with brisk efficiency. She was a widow of 15 years, hardened by loss but sharp as a tack. "Bring me more quilts," she ordered, kneeling by the boy. "If we don't get the chill out of him soon, he won't see morning." Together they layered him in wool, tucked hot stones at his feet, and worked to coax color back into his face. Martha's lips pressed into a tight line as she brushed the wet hair from his forehead. "He's one of the Greyfeather kin. You can see it plain." "Ethan." She looked up, eyes narrowing. This could mean trouble. Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "Trouble or not, he's a life, and he's here." They fell into silence, broken only by the crack of the fire and the howl of the wind. After a long moment, the boy stirred. His eyes flickered open, dark, wide, filled with confusion. He tried to speak, but the words came out broken, more breath than voice. Ethan bent close. "What is it?" he asked. The boy's hand groped for the satchel, clutching it with a strength that startled Ethan. His lips formed a single word, halting, almost swallowed by exhaustion. "Hide." Then he slumped again, drifting into unconsciousness. Martha sat back with a troubled sigh. "Hide what, Ethan? And from whom?" Ethan looked at the pouch, at the stitched seams glinting in the firelight. He thought of the horse, wild, yet deliberate, pounding on his barn door as though guided by more than instinct. This boy hadn't simply been blown here by chance. Something larger had delivered him into Ethan's care. For the rest of the night, they worked in shifts. Ethan fed the fire. Martha wrung out cloths dipped in warm water to lay on the boy's forehead. The storm hammered the cabin relentlessly, but inside they fought a quieter battle, one waged against the creeping cold in the boy's body. Every time Ethan thought the pulse had faded, he felt it return, fragile but determined. Near dawn, the storm softened to a mournful whisper. Exhaustion pulled at Ethan's bones, but he sat vigil by the boy, lantern light flickering against his lined face. The satchel remained clutched in the boy's grip, as though even in unconsciousness he knew its worth. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring into the fire, and wondered what secret this stranger had carried through the blizzard, what burden the white horse had delivered to his door. And though he did not know why, Ethan felt certain of one thing. His quiet, solitary life would never be the same again. The boy lay still for hours, his breath shallow, his skin clammy despite the warmth of the fire. Ethan hovered near, refilling the kettle, turning the blankets, listening for every fragile sigh. He had seen men wrestle with death before, soldiers clinging to life in canvas tents, but this was different. This wasn't war. This was a boy whose story had only begun, fighting the same enemy Ethan had fought for years, cold and silence. By morning, a pale light seeped through the frosted window panes. The storm had spent its fury, leaving the land blanketed in drifts that glowed like silver under the dawn. Ethan stoked the fire and bent low once more. This time, when he pressed the boy's wrist, the pulse was firmer. He leaned close, and to his surprise, two dark eyes blinked open, clouded with confusion but alive. "You're safe," Ethan said quietly. The words sounded strange in his own ears. How long had it been since he'd spoken them to anyone? The boy's lips parted, and after a few failed attempts he managed a hoarse whisper. "Where am I?" "In my home," Ethan answered. "You were found in the storm. The horse brought you." At that, something flickered in the boy's gaze. He tried to sit up but winced, clutching at his ribs. Ethan steadied him gently, easing him back against the quilt. "Easy. You've got frostbite starting, and your body's been through hell. You need rest." Martha appeared from the kitchen with a steaming mug, her face lined with worry but softened by relief. "Drink this," she said firmly, crouching beside him. "It's broth, warm and simple. Do as you're told." The boy hesitated before accepting. His hands shook as Ethan helped guide the mug to his lips. The first swallow made him cough, but the second stayed down. Slowly, color began to creep back into his face. Martha's stern features eased, though she muttered under her breath about the danger of strays landing on doorsteps. When the boy finished, he sagged back, eyes heavy but aware. "Name's Nathan," he murmured. His voice carried a faint lilt, the rhythm of a language older than English. "Nathan Greyfeather." Ethan nodded. "I'm Ethan. This is Martha." He glanced at the satchel still pressed against Nathan's chest. "You held onto that thing all night like it was life itself. What's inside?" Nathan's eyes sharpened, and his hand closed over the leather as though shielding it. "Not yet," he whispered. "Not safe." Martha exchanged a look with Ethan, frowning. "You've dragged us into something we don't understand," she said. "Secrets don't sit well in this country. Folks here don't forgive easily, Ethan." But Ethan's gaze was fixed on Nathan, on the way his lips trembled as though words fought to break free. The boy struggled, then spoke in a voice rough as gravel. "They'll come. Soldiers. Men with money. They think my people thieves, liars. But this..." His grip tightened on the pouch. "This proves truth." Ethan didn't press. The boy's strength was barely back, and more questions would only drain him. Still, the weight of those words sank into the room like an anvil. Outside, the land was silent, pristine under the new snow. Yet Ethan knew silence didn't last. It never did. Later that day, when Nathan slept again, Ethan stepped outside to check the barn. Whisper stood near the door, head lifted, ears flicking toward the house as if listening for his rider. The horse's coat gleamed faintly, patches of ice melting into rivulets. Ethan approached slowly, offering his hand. Whisper didn't shy away. Instead, the stallion lowered his head, letting Ethan rest a palm against the warmth of his muzzle. "You brought him here," Ethan said softly. The horse's breath misted over his hand, hot against the cold morning. "For a reason, didn't you?" Whisper blinked, dark eyes steady, as though answering without words. When Ethan returned inside, Martha was knitting by the fire, her needles clicking sharply. She didn't look up. "You can't keep them both, Ethan. A wild horse and a boy with soldiers on his heels? It's asking for ruin." Ethan removed his coat, hanging it by the door. He glanced at Nathan, sleeping restlessly under layers of quilts, one hand still locked over the satchel. Then he looked back at Martha. "Maybe ruin's already here. Maybe the choice is whether we face it alone or together." Martha's hands stilled on the needles, her lips pursed, but she didn't argue. The fire popped, sparks leaping up the chimney, and outside, Whisper stamped once, the sound echoing like a vow. Ethan sat back in his chair, fatigue pulling at him, yet a strange calm settled in his chest. For the first time in years, he wasn't drifting aimlessly in grief. He had been given something to protect, a duty he hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. And as the boy's breathing steadied in the shadows, Ethan realized that saving him had already begun to change the shape of his own life. Night returned with a bitter edge, though the storm had passed. The snow lay quiet outside Ethan's cabin, its surface gleaming under a pale moon. Inside, the fire burned steady, throwing warmth into the corners of the room. Nathan slept in fits, his lips moving now and then, in whispers of a language Ethan couldn't understand. Each time the boy stirred, Ethan felt his own heart hitch, as though listening for the rhythm of life itself. But it was the horse who refused to rest. Whisper stood outside the cabin window, his white coat ghost-like against the dark trees, his breath fogging in the night air. From time to time, Ethan caught the stallion's silhouette pacing back and forth, ears pricked, eyes shining with a vigilance that unsettled him. Most horses sought shelter after a storm, huddled down for rest. Not this one. This one kept watch, as if guarding both boy and man inside. When Ethan stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaked under his boots. Whisper lifted his head at once, gaze sharp. The connection was immediate, wordless, yet undeniable. "You're waiting for him," Ethan said softly. The horse snorted, pawed the snow, then stood still again, like a sentinel carved in frost. Behind him, the cabin door opened, and Martha emerged, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. "That creature hasn't taken its eyes off the house all evening," she said, her voice low. "Like it knows what danger's out there." "Maybe it does," Ethan replied. He leaned against the porch post, eyes never leaving the horse. "Maybe it knows more than we do." Martha gave a sharp laugh that held no humor. "Don't romanticize it, Ethan. It's an animal. Strong, yes. Fierce, maybe. But animals don't choose sides in men's quarrels." Ethan didn't argue. He'd seen enough in war to know the difference between instinct and intention. Whisper's eyes carried intention. There was a steadiness there, a message he couldn't name but felt down to his marrow. Inside, Nathan stirred. Ethan heard his hoarse voice call out a single word one Ethan couldn't make out, but Whisper did. The stallion's head swung sharply toward the window. A deep, resonant nicker rolled from his throat, low and urgent, as though answering a command. Ethan froze. Martha's breath caught. They hurried back inside to find Nathan half sitting up, sweat beading his forehead, his hand stretched weakly toward the window. His lips moved again, this time clearer, though the words belonged to his own tongue. Whisper answered with another low sound from outside. The boy's trembling eased. His hand fell back against the blanket. Sleep claimed him once more, but a fragile peace seemed to settle in. Ethan sat heavily in his chair. "You saw that," he said, though Martha didn't need convincing. She crossed herself quickly, muttering about things best left unexplained. By dawn, Nathan woke more lucid, his eyes tired but clearer. Ethan offered him water, which he accepted gratefully. For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Nathan spoke. "Whisper," he said. Slowly, the English word shaped carefully on his tongue. "He finds me when I am lost." His gaze drifted toward the frosted window. "He does not sleep when danger near." Ethan studied him, then glanced outside where the horse still lingered, ears turning at every sound. "He's not ordinary," Ethan said. Nathan's lips curved in the faintest smile. "He is family." The weight of that word sank deep into the room. Family. Ethan felt it lodge in his chest like a splinter of memory, sharp and aching. Once he'd had a family laughter in this cabin, voices by this very hearth. Whisper's watchful stance, Nathan's fragile bond with the animal, it stirred something long buried in him, something he'd locked away in silence. Martha, sensing the shift, clattered pots in the kitchen to drown it out. But even her noise couldn't mask the truth. The horse wasn't just a creature out of the blizzard. He was a bridge, binding a broken boy and a broken man together in ways neither yet understood. That evening, as the horizon burned with the red glow of sunset, Ethan stepped outside again. Whisper stood where he had all day, body tense, eyes fixed on the tree line. The silence of the valley was heavy, too heavy. Ethan followed the horse's gaze and, for just a second, thought he saw a shadow slip between the pines. A rider perhaps, or maybe only his imagination. Still, the unease was real. He placed a hand on the porch rail, his jaw tightening. If someone was out there watching, Whisper knew it first. When he returned to the cabin, Nathan lifted his head. "They come," the boy murmured, eyes dark with certainty. Ethan didn't ask how he knew. He didn't need to. Whisper's restless vigil had already told him. The next morning dawned clear, the snow glittering like powdered glass across the valley. A fragile peace hung in the air, though Ethan sensed it wouldn't last. He sat at the rough-hewn table, sipping coffee that tasted more like ash than comfort, while Martha busied herself at the stove. Nathan sat bundled near the fire, still pale but stronger than he'd been days before. His dark eyes studied the flames, distant, haunted. When Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice was steady but low. "You've been clutching that satchel since the night you arrived. If there's something inside worth dying for, maybe it's time we know what it island. Nathan's hand tightened on the pouch, his jaw set. For a long moment he said nothing, and Ethan thought the boy might refuse again. But then Nathan's shoulders slumped, and he nodded. With careful fingers, he tugged at the crude stitching along the flap, unraveling what had once been sealed against discovery. From within, he drew a folded bundle of hide-wrapped parchment. He placed it on the table with a reverence that made both Ethan and Martha lean closer. Ethan unfolded it slowly. The parchment crackled, edges yellowed from age and weather. Drawn in ink that had faded but endured were lines that mapped the valley, the ridges, the rivers, the springs. At the center was a mark, a symbol etched in strong strokes that denoted something hidden beneath the earth. "It's a map," Martha whispered, her breath catching. Nathan nodded. "It shows the underground waters, springs that feed the valley, land my people have lived on for generations." His voice grew sharper, steadier as he spoke. "The railroad men, the ranchers, they want it. They say we steal cattle, steal horses, but it is not true. They want the land, they want the water. This," he tapped the parchment with a trembling finger, "is proof it is ours." Ethan stared at the map, feeling the weight of its meaning pressed down like stone. He'd seen men fight over less, over a scrap of territory, a rumor of gold. But water? In these mountains, water meant life, wealth, and power. Whoever controlled it could control the future of the entire valley. Martha backed away, shaking, her head. "Ethan, if anyone finds out that's here, if they even suspect this cabin will be burned to the ground, you'll be branded a traitor." Ethan folded the map carefully, setting it back into Nathan's hands. "Then it stays here. No one needs to know." Nathan's gaze lifted to meet his. "They already know I carry something. They hunt me. They will not stop." The truth in his voice was undeniable. Ethan felt it settle heavy in his chest. Whisper's restless pacing outside, the shadow he'd glimpsed by the tree line, it all made sense now. The storm had delivered more than a half-frozen boy. It had brought the seed of a conflict that could swallow them whole. Later that afternoon, Ethan stepped out to the barn. Whisper stood in the corral, mane lifting in the breeze, eyes fixed on the horizon. Ethan approached him with the quiet respect one gave to something wild and untamed. He thought of the map, of the lives it represented. Whisper's dark gaze met his, and Ethan felt as though the horse knew exactly what had been revealed. That evening, as the sun bled red across the snow, Nathan sat at the table, the satchel once more clutched to his chest. Martha moved around the kitchen, her hands restless, her mouth set in a tight line. At last she spoke, her tone sharp with fear. "Ethan, this is too big. You can't protect him. You can't protect that paper. Not against men with guns, not against the army itself." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but resolute. "Maybe not, but I won't send him back out there to die. If that horse hadn't brought him here, he'd be dead already. That has to mean something." Nathan looked up at him then, eyes wide, searching. For the first time, trust flickered there, fragile but real. Outside, Whisper gave a sudden, piercing whinny, his call echoing through the valley. The sound was not fear, it was warning. Ethan rose, crossing to the window. In the distance beyond the pines, a rider moved along the ridge. Too far to see clearly, but close enough to know the valley was no longer empty. Ethan's jaw tightened. The boy's words rang in his ears. They will not stop. He turned back to Nathan and Martha, the firelight flickering across his face. "Whatever's coming," he said, his voice firm, "we'll face it here, together." The snow had hardened overnight, forming a crust that cracked under Ethan's boots as he walked the yard at dawn. The air was sharp, brittle enough to sting his lungs, and the world lay unnervingly still. Only the faint plumes from the horse's nostrils marked the silence. Whisper stood apart from the others, mane catching the pale light, body tense as if listening to voices only he could hear. Ethan followed the stallion's gaze toward the tree line. The pines loomed dark against the white, and for a heartbeat, Ethan thought he saw it again, that flicker of movement, a rider slipping between shadows. He narrowed his eyes, but the figure was gone, swallowed by the forest. When he returned to the cabin, Martha was already pacing, her apron twisted in her hands. "Something's out there," she muttered. "I could feel it in my bones all night. You saw them too, didn't you?" Ethan set his rifle by the door without answering. He didn't need to confirm what she already knew. Nathan, wrapped in blankets near the fire, looked up sharply. "They watch," he said quietly. "Always. They want what I carry." His hand brushed the satchel hidden beneath the quilts, as if to reassure himself it was still there. Later that morning, Ethan saddled one of his geldings and rode to the ridge. The snow crunched beneath iron shoes, echoing through the valley. From the crest, he surveyed the expanse. The horizon was painted in steel gray, the world vast and empty. Yet the tracks in the snow told a different story, hooves pressed deep, fresh enough to glisten. Whoever had been watching hadn't vanished. They were circling. When Ethan returned, Martha was waiting with that look she wore when her fears turned sharp. "You can't keep pretending this is just a boy in need," she said. "The moment he crossed your threshold, you were part of his fight. And if those men come here, they won't stop with him. They'll burn everything." Ethan glanced at Nathan, who sat quietly mending the strap of his satchel. The boy's movements were precise, his jaw tight. For someone so young, his eyes carried an old weight. He had already seen too much. That evening, the three of them sat to supper. The stew simmered, filling the cabin with the scent of venison and herbs, but none of them tasted it. Nathan ate little, his gaze fixed on the window. Whisper's silhouette moved beyond the glass, pacing along the fence, restless. Suddenly the stallion froze. His head shot up, ears pricked forward. A low nicker rumbled from his throat, so deep it vibrated the glass panes. Ethan rose, heart hammering. He flung the door open, stepping into the bitter air. At first he saw nothing, then a flash of movement at the edge of the timber, the unmistakable gleam of metal catching the last light, a rifle barrel. "Inside," Ethan barked, pushing Martha back toward the cabin. Whisper screamed, a sound that tore through the valley, wild and furious. The stallion reared against the fence, hooves slicing the air. Whoever lurked in the trees fled deeper into the forest, leaving only the silence of snow and the echo of the horse's cry. Nathan clutched the doorframe, face pale but steady. "They come closer now," he said, voice like stone. "Next time, they will not just watch." Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle, the resolve in him hardening like the frozen ground beneath his boots. He knew the boy was right. Shadows didn't circle forever. Sooner or later they struck. That night, as the fire burned low, Ethan sat awake, his rifle across his knees. Martha slept in her chair, a shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, but Nathan lay staring at the ceiling, his fingers curled protectively around the satchel. Outside, Whisper moved like a ghost across the yard, his steady watch never wavering. The valley lay quiet, but the peace had cracked. Something hunted them now, something with patience and intent. And Ethan knew the shadow in the snow would return. The cabin had never felt so fragile. Its walls, once a shelter against weather and grief, now seemed too thin to hold back the threat gathering in the woods. Ethan kept his rifle close, moving from window to window through the night, while Whisper prowled the yard like a restless guardian. By morning, no attack had come, but the silence felt more dangerous than gunfire. Martha tried to carry on with chores, though her hands trembled as she kneaded bread. "You can't fight shadows forever, Ethan," she said. "If they're watching, they'll strike when we least expect it. That boy's brought us a storm bigger than the blizzard." Nathan sat by the fire, listening. His expression was solemn, almost resigned. "It is not just me," he said softly. "It is what I carry. They want to erase us. If this paper is lost, my people lose their voice." Ethan looked at him, seeing not a boy but a messenger of something larger. He had carried men bleeding out of battles, watched them cling to scraps of hope, and this felt the same, except this time, the war wasn't in a distant field. It was coming straight to his door. That night, the first test arrived. Ethan had just stepped outside to scatter hay when Whisper stiffened. The stallion's head shot up, ears sharp as arrows. A warning scream split the air. Ethan swung around, catching sight of two figures slipping from the trees. They moved fast, crouched low, rifles glinting under the moon. "Inside!" Ethan roared, though Martha was already dragging Nathan toward the back room. He leveled his rifle, firing a warning shot into the snow at the intruder's feet. One stumbled, cursed, then raised his own gun. Before the shot rang out, Whisper lunged. The stallion hurled himself against the corral fence, breaking the top rail in a splintering crack. His hooves struck the ground like thunder as he charged. The attackers panicked. One fired wildly, the shot sparking off the barn wall. The other tried to retreat, but Whisper bore down on him, rearing high. The man threw himself into the snow as the horse's hooves crashed down inches from his chest. Ethan fired again, closer this time, the crack echoing off the valley walls. The men scrambled back toward the tree line, their shouts carried away by the wind. Whisper pawed the ground, snorting clouds of fury, refusing to give chase until they had vanished into the pines. When the yard fell silent again, Ethan lowered his rifle. His breath came hard, misting in the cold air. He turned to Whisper, who stood like a warrior carved from frost, chest heaving, eyes blazing with a fire that was almost human. Ethan had never seen such raw defiance in an animal. The stallion had not just defended himself, he had defended them all. Inside, Nathan clutched the satchel, his knuckles white. "They will return," he said in a flat voice. "Next time, more of them." Martha wrung her hands, her face pale. "Lord, help us, Ethan. We're just 3 souls against an army." Ethan's gaze went to Whisper, still restless in the yard, pacing like a sentinel that would never abandon its post. "Not 3, he said quietly. 4. For the first time, Nathan's eyes softened, a flicker of hope breaking through his fear. He whispered something in his language, words Ethan couldn't understand, but the meaning was clear when Whisper answered with a low, steady rumble. That night, the cabin no longer felt fragile. It felt like a fortress, bound together not by stone or wood, but by loyalty, man, woman, boy, and horse, standing against the darkness pressing in from the trees. Ethan knew this was only the beginning. The first test had come, and though they had survived, the true storm was still on its way. The fire in the hearth crackled low, casting amber shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind had fallen still, but the cabin seemed heavier than ever, its timbers straining under the weight of what had just happened. Martha sat rigid in her chair, her hands folded tight around a rosary that had not left her apron pocket in years. Nathan leaned against the back wall, the satchel pressed to his chest, his eyes dark hollows lit only by the flicker of flames. Ethan stood in the center of the room, rifle still slung across his shoulder, staring into the fire as though searching for answers in the embers. No one had spoken since the attackers fled. The silence was louder than gunfire, filled with everything unspoken: fear, questions, the creeping certainty that the valley was no longer safe. It was Nathan who broke it first. His voice was quiet, almost fragile, but the words cut clear. "They will return with more." Martha's head snapped up. "Hush, boy. Don't you dare say it like you're inviting it." Nathan shook his head slowly. "It is not invitation, it is truth. They want what I carry, they want me gone." He tapped the satchel with his fingertips, then lowered his gaze. "If I leave now, maybe they do not harm you." Ethan turned sharply. "No," his tone was iron. "Running won't stop them. They've already marked this place. Even if you rode out tonight, they'd burn my barn, tear this cabin down plank by plank. You can't fight shadows by feeding them what they want." Nathan's eyes searched his face, weighing those words. His lips parted, and Ethan could see the tremor in his hands, the conflict that comes when pride and fear collide. "But why?" Nathan asked finally. "Why risk your life for me? For my people? You owe nothing." Ethan crossed the room, kneeling so they were eye to eye. For, in a moment, he saw not a fugitive but a boy tired, hunted, carrying burdens too heavy for his years. Ethan reached out, resting a steadying hand on his shoulder. "I once failed the people I loved," Ethan said softly. "A wife, a child. They needed me, and I couldn't save them. That's a weight you carry forever. When I found you in that storm, I swore I wouldn't let it happen again. Not to you. Not while I still draw breath." Nathan blinked rapidly, his throat working as though swallowing words he couldn't shape. The firelight caught in his eyes, and for the first time, Ethan thought he saw trust glimmer there. Whisper's knicker rolled faintly from outside, as if echoing the vow. Martha's chair creaked as she leaned forward. Her voice was rough, but her eyes softened. "Then we prepare. If trouble's coming, we'll meet it with more than fear. I've seen enough loss in this valley to last me 2 lives. If the Lord's seen fit to put this boy in our hands, then we do right by him." For the next hour, the cabin stirred with purpose instead of dread. Ethan checked the locks on the doors and windows, tested the rifle sights, and laid out extra ammunition. Martha filled jars with broth, packed food that would keep, muttering about not letting enemies starve them out. Nathan helped where he could, fetching wood, keeping the fire alive, his movements still halting but steadier than before. Each action bound them tighter, 3 people plus 1 horse shaping themselves into something like a family forged in necessity. When the tasks were done, the fire had burned down to glowing coals. Ethan lowered himself into the chair across from Nathan. The boy's eyes were already half closed, exhaustion tugging at him, but when Ethan spoke, he forced them open again. "Listen to me," Ethan said. "Whatever happens, you're not facing it alone. Not anymore, I promise." Nathan's lips curved in the faintest ghost of a smile, the kind that belongs more to hope than certainty. He nodded once, then let his head sink against the blanket. His breathing evened, soft and steady, as sleep finally claimed him. Ethan remained awake, watching the fire fade, the rifle across his knees. Outside, Whisper stood unmoving in the moonlight, a pale sentinel guarding the dark. For the first time in years, Ethan felt the hollowness inside him ease, filled by a vow that bound him not to the past, but to the fragile future, sitting only a few feet away. The night deepened, and still he sat there, holding watch, knowing the storm that truly mattered had not yet arrived, but when it did, he would be ready. The snow had begun to soften with the weak touch of midday sun, but the valley still wore its silence like a shroud. Ethan saddled his bay gelding that morning, knowing he couldn't avoid town any longer. Supplies were running thin, and though every step toward the settlement felt like stepping into a trap, he had no choice. Martha pressed a loaf of bread into his hand before he left, her eyes full of unspoken worry. Nathan stood by the door, pale but steady, clutching the satchel to his chest as if it were armor. Whisper lingered near the fence, ears pricked, watching Ethan ride out with an intensity that felt almost human. The trail into town wound between snow-laden pines, the air sharp with the scent of sap. Ethan kept his shoulders squared, but his eyes scanned every ridge. The memory of those intruders in the night still gnawed at him. By the time he reached the wide street of the small settlement, the usual sounds of hammers, wagons, and voices seemed thinner, colored by suspicion. He dismounted in front of the general store. Conversations that had been flowing a moment earlier faltered. Heads turned. Some nodded in greeting, but their eyes slid past him too quickly. Others simply stared. He felt the weight of whispers follow him like shadows. Inside, Sam Dillard, the storekeeper, busied himself with jars on a shelf, though his hand trembled slightly as he set them down. "Cold morning," Sam said, voice too casual. Ethan dropped his list on the counter. "Need flour, salt, and kerosene, and if you've got coffee left, I'll take it." Sam nodded, moving with deliberate slowness. "Word's been traveling," he said finally, eyes still fixed on the shelf. "Folks say you've taken in a stranger." Ethan's jaw tightened. Folks always have something to say. From the back of the store, another voice cut in, sharp and mocking. "Not just any stranger, Dillard. An Indian boy. Spotted near his barn, they say. That horse of his, too white as snow, cursed as the devil." Ethan turned. Two ranch hands leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, smirks on their faces. He knew them, Gregory Hale's men. Their presence here was no accident. "You should choose your words careful," Ethan said evenly. One of them shrugged, "Just repeating what the whole town's already saying. You always did keep to yourself, Cole. But now, harboring fugitives? That's dangerous business." Sam cleared his throat nervously. "That'll be $6, Ethan." Ethan paid in silence, collected his supplies, and walked past the ranch hands without looking at them. Outside, the air felt heavier. He could feel eyes on him from the saloon, the blacksmith shop, even from the church steps. Rumors traveled faster than rivers in thaw, and this one was already flooding every corner of town. As he tied the sacks of flour to his saddle, a voice called his name. He turned to see Sheriff Hawkins approaching, his coat collar turned up against the cold, badge glinting on his chest. The sheriff's expression was unreadable, carved from the same granite as the mountains behind him. "Ethan," Hawkins said, reining in his horse beside him. "Need a word." Ethan kept his hands steady on the saddle straps. "Say it." The sheriff leaned close, his voice low. "Army scouts came, through last night, asking questions about a young Apache. They heard whispers he might be hiding out in this valley. I told them I hadn't seen anything, but, Ethan, don't make a liar out of me." Their eyes locked. Hawkins wasn't threatening, not yet, but the weight of warning in his words was clear. Ethan nodded once. "I'll remember." The sheriff studied him a moment longer, then rode on, leaving only the sound of hooves in the snow. Ethan mounted and turned his horse toward home. The ride back was longer, every mile echoing with the whispers he'd heard in town. Indian boy, fugitive, devil horse. The valley itself seemed to repeat the words back at him. When he finally reached the cabin, Martha was waiting at the porch, her apron dusted with flour, her expression tight. "You saw it in their eyes, didn't you?" she asked as he dismounted. Ethan carried the supplies inside, setting them heavily on the table. "They know something," he said. "Rumors are spreading faster than snowmelt, and the sheriff gave me his warning plain." Nathan listened in silence, his face unreadable. Whisper paced outside, tossing his head, restless. The boy's hand brushed the satchel once more, and his voice was low, steady. "It begins now." The fire popped in the hearth, scattering sparks up the chimney, but the warmth in the room could not chase away the chill Ethan carried back from town. The storm outside had passed, but the storm of men, the kind no wall could keep out, was gathering, and this time it wasn't whispering in shadows. It was marching straight toward them. Morning broke glass clear, the kind of Montana day when breath hangs like silver thread and every sound travels farther than it should. Frost jeweled the fence rails. The sky wore a brittle blue that promised no storm, only a merciless clarity. Ethan shoveled a path to the corral, while Martha banked the fire and clattered pans with a stubborn cheerfulness he recognized as her way of holding fear at arm's length. Nathan stood in the doorway with the satchel strapped crosswise beneath his coat, watching Whisper stamp and toss his head as if the horse had been counting heartbeats until the boy appeared. "Let him out," Nathan said quietly. "He needs to move, and I need to show you why they fear him and why they shouldn't." Ethan unlaced the gate. Whisper slid through like moonlight, high-stepping into the open pasture where the snow lay thin and wind-combed. Nathan moved after him, not with the swagger of an owner but the deference of kin. He didn't grab for a halter, didn't reach for rope. He simply stood, shoulders square, hands down, breathing slow as winter smoke. Whisper swung his head, one ear fixed on Nathan, then began to circle at a loose trot, hooves ticking a rhythm that matched the boy's steady inhale and exhale. "What are you doing?" Ethan called. "Listening," Nathan answered. "He speaks with his feet first." The stallion slowed. Nathan angled his body a hand's breadth and Whisper bent with it, drifting like water to the left. Another tilt, and the horse flowed right. A subtle lift of the boy's chin sent him into a long, ground-eating lope that rolled through muscle and bone as smoothly as a river breaking free of ice. No halter, no bit, only the hinge of breath and the axis of trust. Martha had stepped onto the porch, apron dusted white. "Mercy," she whispered, forgetting to be afraid. "He's reading the boy's mind, his heart," Ethan said, surprising himself. Nathan whistled soft and low, a sound with more air than note. Whisper snapped into a canter pirouette, hindquarters rooted, shoulders drawing crescents in the snow. The stallion's neck arched, steam lifting off his back like prayer. Then Nathan stilled, and the horse melted down to a standstill facing him square, ears pricked, eyes dark as wet bark. "Approach like friend," Nathan said without looking away. "He will meet you halfway if you leave him half his pride." Ethan stepped forward, palms open. Whisper watched, weighing him with a sovereign calm that made Ethan aware of every noise his boots made, every twitch of his breath. When he was near enough to feel the horse's heat, Whisper reached first velvet lips, touching Ethan's sleeve, a knight bestowing permission. Ethan laid a hand along the stallion's jaw and felt the thrum of life there, bright, unbroken, fierce. "He'd cross fire for you," Ethan murmured. "He already did," Nathan replied, and for an instant, the memory of the nightmen had run from hooves and steam flashed between them, a promise made in panic, sealed in courage. "Teach me," Ethan said. "If I'm to stand with you, I should speak his language." Nathan nodded. They worked until the sun rang noon along the mountain ridges. Nathan taught him the grammar of wait and intention, the pause that means permission, the exhale that means peace. Whisper showed his own lexicon, a flicker of ear for question, a sigh for answer, a tail switch when Ethan crowded his thoughts. When Ethan grew impatient and tried to force a turn, Whisper lifted a warning hoof shadow, slicing across the snow like a line not to be crossed. Ethan stepped back and laughed, the sound rusty from long disuse. "Fair enough," he said. "I've pushed enough living things for one lifetime." They broke for stew Martha carried out in tin bowls, the steam curling like ghosts of summer. She watched them eat from the fence, chin high in approval she pretended to deny. "If that horse were any prettier, he'd have to start paying rent," she said, and Nathan's shy smile came quick as sunlight on a blade. Then Whisper's head came up sudden, hard. The stallion froze, one foreleg suspended, nose tilted to the wind. Nathan stiffened. Ethan's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. From the timberline to the north came nothing a human ear could pass, only a seam in the silence that a prey animal hears before the world remembers how to be cruel. Whisper snorted, pawed once, then stood as still as a spring set to snap. "Riders?" Ethan asked. "Not close," Nathan said, eyes narrowed, "but not far enough." Ethan's gaze swept the tree shadow that pooled blue along the ridge. He saw nothing. That did not matter. He had learned to believe the stallion first. "We keep the work going," he said, forcing calm into each syllable. "If men are watching, let them see what you are. Not a threat, a fact." For the next hour, Nathan showed Ethan the ancient patience of approach and retreat. Whisper learned the shape of a blanket thrown slow and sure, the weight of a saddle placed without sting. Nathan didn't cinch it. He let the leather sit like a promise to be kept later. He demonstrated how to tip a hoof into Ethan's palm with just a brush of finger on the chestnut, how to trace circles down the horse's neck until the great head hung heavy and trust drowsed in the half-lidded eye. "People say Mustangs are devils," Martha said softly. "People fear what won't bow when shouted at," Ethan answered. "Maybe the devil is the shouting." A magpie rattled from the spruces, a harsh alarm that cracked the fragile peace. In the far trees, something moved only a sliver, only a ripple where no wind ran. Nathan's shoulders sharpened. Whisper coiled, gathering himself, not to flee but to stand harder. Ethan stepped close to the boy. "If Hale's hands are up there, they'll carry a story back no matter what we do. Let it be the right one." Nathan took a breath, deep and clean. "Then let them see truth." He swung up bareback, one smooth vault that landed him at the withers like he'd been born there. Whisper surged forward into a long climb through the pasture, the boy's body and the horse's spine braided into one intention: forward, free. They took the low rise at an easy lope, then Nathan turned him toward the downed cottonwood. Whisper gathered, lifted clean air beneath all four irons, and came down as softly as a hush. He doubled back at a trot so cadenced that even Ethan could feel the music of it in his ribs. On the ridge, a glint sun on glass, winked and vanished. Watching, then, always watching. Nathan slid to the ground and pressed his forehead to Whisper's. "Good," he murmured in his own tongue. Strong, but soft. Whisper breathed into the boy's hair, and, for a heartbeat, everything in the valley was simple. "Horse boy winter light." Ethan cleared his throat. "You said men fear him. I see why they should respect him. They fear what stands beside us," Nathan said, tapping the satchel under his coat. "The map says water flows where their cattle graze. They will not share. If this paper lives, we live." Ethan's gaze drifted to the mountains where snowmelt lay sleeping inside stone. He imagined springs rising like truth no one could bury. He imagined men with money trying anyway. "Then the paper lives," he said, and the words felt like nails driven true. By late afternoon, clouds feathered thin across the sun, and the cold gained back what little the day had yielded. They cooled Whisper out with long walking loops and rubbed him down until the white coat shone like hammered silver. Martha fetched a carrot from the root cellar and held it out at arm's length, a queen offering tribute. Whisper accepted with grave ceremony and a dainty crunch that made her laugh out loud. "Lord help me, I'm smitten," she said. "If I start knitting that creature a scarf, someone stop me." "Only if you make me one first," Ethan replied, and the look Martha shot him exasperated and fond warmed the air more than the sun had managed all day. They were leading Whisper back toward the corral when the stallion's ears flicked again. Not alarm this time, attention. From the south trail came the faint, deliberate rhythm of two horses traveling at a lawman's pace. Not hurrying, not hiding. Ethan traded a look with Nathan. He knew that beat. He'd heard it for years before he'd tried to forget, the cadence of concern wearing a badge. Sheriff Hawkins rode into view a minute later, hat pulled low, another rider half a length behind lean, well-dressed, a scarf bright as spilled wine. Gregory Hale did not bother to dismount. He surveyed the yard as if pricing it. Whisper grew taller beneath Nathan's hand, neck arched, breath coming slow and measured through flared nostrils. Hawkins raised a palm. "Afternoon," he said, voice even. "Heard tell there was a white Mustang out here doing tricks. Had to see for myself." "Not tricks," Nathan said, calm as cold iron. "Language." Hale's smile cut narrow. "Pretty language," he drawled. Shame if it had to end. His eyes drifted too casually to the line of Nathan's coat where the satchel's outline barely printed. "Some things belong to progress, son. Best hand them over before progress takes them by the throat. Whisper stepped between Hale's stare and the boy, a small move with large meaning. Hawkins' jaw ticked. He saw it all. The horse, the boy, the man who had chosen a side. He tipped his hat to Ethan. Town council's called a hearing 2 days from now. Folks want to talk about property and peace. He hesitated. Come willing, and maybe words can do what rifles can't. Ethan's answer came without consulting his fear. We'll be there. Hale's horse sidled, impatient. Hale leaned forward, eyes like chipped ice. Bring that paper too. I like settling matters in daylight. Daylight shows dust same as gold, Ethan said. Careful what you claim to see. Hale laughed softly and wheeled away. Hawkins lingered long enough to look Ethan in the eye, one man to another, warning and plea braided into one glance, then followed. The hoofbeats faded down the south trail until even Whisper stopped listening. Dusk poured blue over the snow. In the hush that followed, Martha spoke first, voice tight but steady. 2 days. 2 days, Ethan echoed. He felt the gravity of it settle into his bones. A clock begun, a rope drawn taut between what had been private and what must now be public. He reached for Whisper's rein and Nathan's shoulder in the same motion, grounding himself in hide warmth and human heat. Then we put truth on its feet. Nathan nodded, and in the fading light, Whisper breathed a slow, deliberate exhale, as if the horse, too, understood that the lesson of the day was not how to turn and stop, but how to step forward when the world watched. The 2 days passed with a heaviness that pressed on every hour. Ethan spent them mending tack, checking rifles, and stacking wood until his muscles ached, but none of it eased the tension inside. Nathan practiced his English, repeating simple phrases over and over at Martha's insistence. She drilled him like a schoolteacher, insisting, speak plain and slow, look them in the eye. Let no one call you less than you are. Whisper paced the corral in restless arcs, as if he, too, sensed that words would soon matter more than hooves. When dawn finally broke, pale and icy, Ethan hitched the wagon. Nathan climbed up beside him, his coat buttoned high, the satchel strapped close beneath. Martha insisted on coming, her jaw tight as she settled on the seat. Whisper followed on a lead rope, his presence as necessary as breath itself. Ethan couldn't shake the thought that if they were to be judged, the stallion's testimony might matter more than any human voice. The town was already stirring when they arrived. The bell over the livery rang sharp in the cold air, calling folks toward the white-painted building that served as both church and hall. Wagons lined the street, horses tied in neat rows, their breath steaming. Ethan felt every eye turn as he guided the team forward. Whispers rolled like low thunder. That's the boy. That's the horse. That's Ethan Cole, fool enough to shelter them. Inside, the hall smelled of wood smoke, damp wool, and judgment. Rough benches were filled with ranchers, merchants, and families. Gregory Hale sat near the front, his coat immaculate, his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of a man certain of victory. Sheriff Hawkins stood to one side, arms crossed, his face unreadable. At the raised platform, Reverend Mays adjusted his spectacles, preparing to preside. His voice carried when he finally spoke. This gathering is to address the matter of a young Apache found in our valley, and the claims of land and water tied to him. We will hear testimony, and we will seek peace, not discord. Let it be done in order. Nathan shifted beside Ethan, his hands tight in his lap. Ethan leaned close. Speak when it's time. Until then, hold steady. Hale rose first, his words smooth as oil. Neighbors, we all know why we're here. This boy carries a paper he claims proves his people own land meant for settlers. But what have we seen of these tribes? Raids, theft, lies. They don't honor treaties. They twist them. And that horse, white as bone, wild as sin, it's a symbol of chaos, not peace. Do we let this nonsense stand in the way of progress? Of the railroad that will bring us wealth? Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others frowning. Ethan rose slowly, his frame filling the space. His voice was steady, carrying the authority of a man who had seen blood spilled for lesser lies. You call him a thief, but I found him half dead in a storm, carried by a horse that refused to let him die. That's not chaos, that's providence. And that paper? It bears signatures and seals that no boy could forge. You speak of progress, Hale, but what good is progress if it's built on burying the truth? The Reverend motioned for Nathan to step forward. For a moment, the boy looked very young, dwarfed by the hall, his dark eyes sweeping faces hard with doubt. Then he squared his shoulders. His English was careful, each word measured. "My people, we trade fair. We breed our own horses. We want peace. This paper is proof. We are not thieves," Arantxa scoffed. Easy words, but who can trust them? Before Ethan could reply, a sudden sound cut the air, a deep, resonant nicker. Whisper, tied outside, called as if on cue. Heads turned toward the windows. The stallion reared, white against the winter light, mane blazing, hooves striking sparks from the frozen ground. Gasps filled the hall. Even the skeptical rancher's voice faltered. Reverend Mays rapped his cane. "Enough of this clamor. Let us see the document." Nathan reached beneath his coat and withdrew the parchment, hands steady despite the tremor in the room. Ethan helped him unfold it on the Reverend's table. The inked lines glowed under lamplight. The seals pressed into wax were undeniable. The Reverend read in silence, then looked up, his eyes grave. "This is no child's trick. This is a treaty signed and witnessed. It grants the Jicarilla Band rights to these waters." Hale surged to his feet, face dark. "Lies. They forged it." Reverend Mays's voice cracked like a whip. "Sit down, Mr. Hale. Until proof of forgery is shown, this paper stands." The room buzzed with voices, sharp and divided. Ethan stood beside Nathan, a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tide shift. For the first time, truth had a foothold. But even as relief stirred in his chest, Ethan caught sight of Hawkins's face, tense, alert, his eyes flicking to the doorway. A sudden chill swept the hall. Boots struck wood in rhythm. Soldiers marched in, led by a lieutenant whose face bore the cold certainty of orders. His voice cut through the uproar. "By command of Fort Benton, this boy is to be taken into custody for questioning in connection with disturbances south of here. Stand aside." Gasps erupted. Nathan's face went white, but he stood his ground, clutching the treaty to his chest. Whisper screamed again from outside, the sound shattering glass silence. Ethan stepped forward, planting himself between the boy and the soldiers. His voice was steel. "You'll have to go through me." The hall froze, balanced on the edge of violence. The confrontation had only just begun. The air in the hall froze, every breath held as the lieutenant's words echoed against the rafters. Soldiers fanned out with mechanical precision, their boots striking sharp against the planks. The treaty that moments before had seemed like a shield now felt fragile as parchment always was, light enough to burn at the touch of a match. Ethan stepped wider in front of Nathan, his hands loose but ready, while Martha rose from her bench, her eyes flashing like steel beneath her bonnet. "Step aside," the lieutenant barked, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. Ethan's voice came steady, deep as the earth. "This boy is under my protection. He's done no wrong. If you have questions, you'll ask them here, before his neighbors, not behind the walls of some fort where truth has no voice." The soldiers pressed forward. One reached for Nathan's arm. That was when the sound tore through the air, raw, violent, impossible to ignore. Whisper's scream cracked the silence, a sound of such primal force that even hardened soldiers flinched. Heads snapped toward the windows just in time to see the white stallion rear high, mane flying like a storm cloud, hooves striking sparks off the frozen earth. The horse lunged, tearing free of his rope. He hit the yard like a hammer, circling the building with furious strides, each hoofbeat a drumbeat of defiance. The soldiers faltered, their discipline rattled by the sight of a creature too wild to cage. Children cried out in awe, women gasped, and even some of the ranchers leaned forward, caught between fear and wonder. Inside, Nathan's chest rose and fell fast, his hand pressed to the treaty. "He knows," he whispered. "He feels my fear." The lieutenant scowled, waving his men back. "It's an animal, nothing more. Do your duty." But duty cracked under the stallion's fury. Whisper wheeled and charged, hooves churning snow into smoke. He struck the hitching post, splintering it to kindling, then spun with the precision of a warhorse, his eyes fixed on the doorway as though daring the soldiers to step out. Each scream he loosed rattled the hall's windows, each snort a blast of steam that turned the air white. Reverend Mays stood trembling at the pulpit, his Bible clutched to his chest. "Perhaps," he said in a trembling voice that grew stronger as he spoke, "perhaps the Lord himself sent this creature as a witness. Perhaps what we see is not rebellion, but justice made flesh." The crowd murmured, voices rising, doubt shifting to conviction. Hale leapt to his feet, shouting over them, "It's trickery. Don't you see? They've bewitched that beast to frighten us." No, someone called from the back. That horse fights because he knows truth. The lieutenant's jaw tightened. He drew his pistol, raising it toward the door. The moment the metal glinted, Nathan broke free of Ethan's protective hold. He stumbled forward, voice raw with desperation. No, do not harm him. He is not Trick. He is my brother. The declaration struck like lightning. Silence fell again, deeper than before, as Nathan's words rang with a conviction no one could mistake. Even the soldiers hesitated, their guns wavering. Outside, Whisper slowed, circling once more, his eyes never leaving the hall, his breath harsh but steady. He stood tall, unbowed, steam rising from his flanks like incense from an altar. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself between the lieutenant's gun and the boy. If you shoot that horse, you'll turn this hall into a war you can't control. Look around you. You think every man here will side with you? You think they'll forgive the day you put a bullet in the only creature that ever showed them truth without lies? The lieutenant scanned the crowd. He saw faces harden, saw farmers and townsfolk shifting in their seats, hands tightening on chairbacks as though they were rifle stocks. The tide was turning, and he knew it. Slowly, with a growl low in his throat, he lowered the gun. This isn't over, he hissed. Hale slammed his fist on the bench. You let them mock the law. You'll regret it. But his words rang hollow against the thunder of hooves outside. Whisper struck the frozen ground one final time, the sound reverberating through every wall, then stood still, proud and defiant, as though he had spoken the last word. The soldiers withdrew, not defeated but delayed. The lieutenant shoved past, barking orders, his men falling into step as they marched out into the yard. Hale followed, his coat flaring like a banner of spite, but the crowd did not move with him. Their eyes stayed on Ethan, Nathan, and the horse whose fury had shaken more than glass. When the hall emptied, Ethan placed a hand on Nathan's shoulder. The boy was trembling, not from fear but from the weight of what had just passed. Martha crossed herself, her lips trembling into words she didn't share. Ethan looked toward the door where Whisper's silhouette filled the frame, white against the gathering dusk. They'll be back, he said, stronger, angrier. But today they saw what we stand for. Nathan nodded, clutching the treaty tighter. His voice came low but firm. We stand together. And outside, the stallion lowered his head in a slow, deliberate bow, as though sealing their vow with the power of his own unbreakable spirit. We stand together, Nathan had said, and the words still hung in Ethan's chest like a bell note that refused to fade. Evening bled out over the valley as they left the hall, the sky turning the color of bruised plums. The townfolk drifted away in knots of murmurs, glancing back not at Gregory Hale or the soldiers, but at the white stallion, waiting motionless at the hitch rail, steam rising from his flanks like a vow made visible. Whisper flicked an ear when Nathan touched his neck, and the boy's shoulders loosened as if the horse had drawn fear out of him and swallowed it whole. On the wagon ride home, the runners hissed over packed snow. Martha held the treaty under her cloak, both hands pressing it flat against her ribs, as though to warm it back to life after the chill of the hall. Nathan sat between her and Ethan, the brim of his hat shadowing his eyes, the line of his mouth set in a calm older than his years. Ethan drove with one glove off, wanting the raw bite of night air in his palm. It kept him awake, honest. The stars came out, bright as nails driven into black timber. Somewhere in the timberline, an owl uttered its one-note question, and silence huge, listening answered. Back at the ranch, the cabin door breathed out heat when they entered. Martha put on water and pretended to bustle, but the clatter of her spoon against the pot rang too loud. You two sit, she ordered. You look like men who've forgotten you were given lungs. She shot Ethan a sideways glance. And you, stubborn mule, don't say you're fine. You're pale as leftover ash. Nathan laid the treaty on the table carefully, like the body of a bird he meant to heal. Today, he said, his English slow and precise, the soldiers saw the church full of people. They saw the reverend touch the paper and speak truth. That matters. It does, Ethan said, but the words came wrapped in caution. It won't stop them. He stared at the treaty. He could still feel the moment the lieutenant's pistol rose, feel the room pull tight as a snare. They'll try another way, quieter, meaner. Then we get louder. Martha snapped, surprising them both. She planted her hands on the table, chin lifted. You think I sat quiet 15 winters after burying my Martin because quiet ever saved a soul? No, we gather voices. We turn rumor to witness. Ethan met her gaze. Witness, he repeated, tasting the word. It wasn't the language of rifles. It was the language of courts and councils and of churches, where people admitted what they'd seen in front of God, so they couldn't take it back. He felt something inside him take a deeper breath. All right. He turned to Nathan. We need names. Anyone who's traded fair with your people. Anyone who's seen Hale's men cut fences where they shouldn't, or drive cattle where they pleased. Nathan nodded, thinking. Old Mrs. Avery, he said at last. She buys baskets and herbs from my aunt, says they help her sleep. And the blacksmith, Mr. Lowry, he mends our bits. He knows we don't steal. He jokes, we pay too much. Martha brightened, already making lists in her mind. And Reverend Mays. He read the treaty with his own eyes. If he'll speak again before the council, some ears will open. She stabbed the air with her spoon for emphasis. Men put wool over their eyes easy enough, but scripture on one side and a decent man on the other, harder to ignore. Ethan fed another log to the fire. The pitch caught and whispered up the chimney. Whisper nickered outside, a low, satisfied sound, as he settled near the window where he could watch the shadows. We'll start at dawn, Ethan said. Town will still be raw from today. That's when truth goes in easiest, when another lie hasn't grown to cover it. Nathan circled to the window and placed his palm against the cold pane, where Whisper's breath had fogged the glass. He will stay in the yard? He asked. The night is heavy. He'll stay, Ethan said. He won't be driven off by anything we can name. They ate in a quiet that wasn't fear anymore, but the taut quiet of planning. After supper, Martha wrapped the treaty in oilcloth and wedged it in a gap behind the hearthstones. No more pockets, she said to Nathan. No more hands where a knife can find it. Stone keeps secrets better than sleeves. Ethan's boots felt too loud as he crossed to the peg where his coat hung. He took it down, then put it back. His fingers couldn't decide whether they belonged to a man going out or a man sitting still. I'm going to the church, he said finally. Martha started. Now? With the roads glassed over and men itching to declare you a fool? With the roads glassed over, he repeated gently. So they squeal if anyone follows me. He looked at Nathan. I need to ask a question where I can hear more than my own answer. The boy's gaze softened with a comprehension that did not come from English. I will wait, Nathan said. He will wait with me. He tilted his chin toward the window, and Whisper's shadow shifted, as if he'd understood the grammar of that promise too. Ethan took the lantern and stepped into the night. Snow squeaked under his soles. The cold worked into his beard until it glittered. Above, Orion swung his belt low, a hunter frozen mid-stride. Ethan followed the road's pale ribbon, the lantern's halo small against so much dark. By the time the town's steeple inched out of the pines, his hand had numbed around the lantern's wire handle, and his doubts had exhausted themselves into something steadier, not confidence, but resolve's quieter kin. The church door groaned when he pushed it. The air inside held the tired sweetness of beeswax and old wood. No lights burned. Moonwash fell through the high windows and laid thin pews of silver across the pews. Ethan set the lantern on the floor without lighting it. He sat in the fourth row, where he'd once sat beside a small pair of boots that swung above the plank, and a soft voice that could not keep a hymn in key. Lord, he said after a while, because he did not know how else to begin, I've bargained with you before and you don't like it, so I won't trade. I'll tell you what I know. I know a boy came to my door in a storm I didn't invite and I said yes. I know a horse won't lie, and that one won't leave him. I know men with money call theft what they can't buy. And I know if I run, I won't stop running even if my legs do. He pressed the heels of his hands to his eyes until stars sprang under his lids. I don't ask for miracles, I ask for spine. If the right thing is to stand up, make me stand when my knees remember they have better ideas. If the right thing is to speak, lend me words that don't sound like a rifle's echo. And if I'm wrong, if pride is dressing itself in righteousness, strip it down before it strips us all. The door at the back creaked. Ethan turned, heart jumping, but it was Reverend Mays, hat in hand, his white hair shining pale as chalk in the moonlight. You pray the way a carpenter works, the Reverend said mildly. Straight through the knot until the grain admits what it island. Ethan huffed a surprised laugh. Do you always sneak up on men asking mercy? I came to bank the stove, the Reverend said. But I heard the floor complain under your boots before the door did, so I let you talk to the right ears first. He came down the aisle and sat without invitation, hands folded over his hat. You did right today. Truth seldom walks out of a room smiling, but it does walk out taller. They'll come back with orders that fit their pockets better, Ethan said. Hale won't stop because a prayer and a horse made him rethink the decorum of theft. No, Mays agreed, but he might stop if theft costs more than truth. He tilted his head. Bring your witnesses tomorrow. Bring names, faces, stories told clean. I'll stand beside them, and I'll say what I read. Not what I was told. Mind you, what I read with my own cornbread and coffee eyes. There are men who can argue a rumor until it looks like a fact. Fewer can argue ink pressed into old paper. Ethan felt something ease in his chest. Thank you. Don't thank me for standing where the floor's already level, the Reverend said dryly. Then his voice gentled. Go home. Sleep if sleep will have you. Tell that boy, he's not the only one who believes a horse can be a kind of prayer. The road back felt shorter, not because the cold had softened, but because its sting had purpose. At the edge of the yard, Whisper lifted his head and breathed out, and the breath plumed in a welcome that brushed Ethan's cheek. Inside, Martha had set out 3 mugs, the kind of small gesture that declares a household unbroken. Nathan sat by the hearth, eyes bright in the firelight. You prayed, the boy said, not a question. He touched 2 fingers to his own chest, then to the window where Whisper's shadow moved. We prayed also. Ethan smiled, the expression something he had to dust off to remember how it fit. Then maybe the Lord is outnumbered tonight, Martha snorted. He's been outnumbered by fools for a long while and still manages. She eyed Ethan. Then the clock. Dawn 6 hours away. We want Mrs. Avery and Lowry before Hale's boys start polishing their lies. They lay down in a house that felt, for all its smallness, like a citadel. The wind scratched a branch against the eaves. Somewhere, ice cracked like a far-off rifle, and Whisper answered with a soft, questioning nicker, the kind made not to wake the world but to remind it you are there. Ethan slept in fits, but even the breaks in rest were different now. He would wake with a sentence in his mouth, speak plain and slow, and a sense that the dark was not empty but full of allies he could not see. When grey seeped into the windows, Martha lit the stove and tied her bonnet with hands that did not tremble. Nathan buckled his coat and tucked the treaty back behind the hearthstone, then stood a moment with his palm flat on the warm bricks. Whisper blew into Ethan's palms until blood prickled back into his fingers. They stepped onto the porch as the first weak stripe of sun unstitched the night from the hills. The yard smelled of wood smoke and snow, and the faint iron-tinged scent of horse. Ethan hitched the wagon again, checked the traces twice, then once more for the superstition that feels like prudence when the day decides whether it belongs to you. We gather witnesses, Martha said, as if announcing a harvest. We gather truth, Ethan answered. Nathan touched the stallion's cheek and spoke a word so soft it melted on the cold. Whisper tossed his head once and stood tall. A white flame banked after a long vigil. They climbed into the wagon. As the runners scratched their first lines into the morning's untouched skin, Ethan looked back at the cabin, a small square of human insistence against a continent's worth of winter, and felt no shame in the hope that rose in him. Hope and something harder, forged from prayer, promise, and a horse's long watch. The kind of something that can meet a lie at the corner and not step aside. They rolled toward town with the sun at their backs, and the day waiting like a courtroom that had not yet chosen which word would be allowed to stand. The wagon creaked over frozen ruts as the first sunlight spilled through the pines. Ethan guided the team toward town, each plume of the horse's breath rising like smoke signals. Nathan sat beside him, eyes alert beneath the brim of his hat, his satchel hidden again beneath layers of wool and resolve. Martha rode in the back, bonnet tied tight, her hands resting on a basket of bread she insisted would help persuade reluctant tongues. Whisper followed close, reins loose, his stride deliberate and sure. He looked less like an animal being led than a sentinel escorting them into uncertain judgment. They stopped first at Mrs. Avery's homestead. The old widow opened her door with suspicion, but softened when Nathan greeted her in careful English. You bought baskets from my aunt, he said. Her hands, they made them strong. Mrs. Avery blinked, then nodded, vanishing into the house. She returned with a willow basket lined in bright cloth. Your people never cheated me, she said firmly, and I'll tell that to anyone who asks. She set the basket in Nathan's hands, her gesture a pledge as tangible as ink. At the blacksmith's forge, the air smelled of coal smoke and hot iron. Lowry wiped soot from his brow as Ethan explained. The smith spat into the ashes and said, I've mended more of your folks' tack than Hale's. Paid in silver, not stolen stock. If they call you thieves, They call me blind. And I'll not be called blind by men who never shod a horse straight in their life. He slammed his hammer down on the anvil like a gavel of his own. Word spread faster than they could ride. By the time they reached the square, farmers and ranch hands were already gathered, murmuring in small knots. Some still looked doubtful, but many looked curious, even sympathetic. Reverend Mays stood on the steps of the church, his Bible in one hand and his other raised for silence. "Neighbors," he called, "you've heard rumors. Today you'll hear witness. Let us weigh truth with clear eyes, not with fear." Nathan stepped forward, clutching the basket from Mrs. Avery like a talisman. His English was halting but steady. "My people, we do not steal. We trade. We live with the horses, the rivers. This paper," he touched the satchel beneath his coat, "says we belong here as much as you, but paper means little if neighbors choose lies." A murmur rippled, some muttering doubt, others nodding. Mrs. Avery spoke up, voice sharp as a hawk's cry. "I've traded with them 15 years. Fair every time. Better than some of you." Laughter broke the tension, small but real. Then Lowry added his voice, arms folded across his soot-streaked chest. "If they're thieves, I've been robbed by the same hands for a decade, and I'd welcome it again. That's truth." The soldiers were not far. Ethan felt their absence more keenly than their presence, but the crowd was shifting. Gregory Hale arrived late, his coat gleaming, his voice slick with scorn. "Fine show," he sneered. Neighbors paraded like clowns, tricked by a boy and his painted pony. "But we all know who holds the law." As if summoned, Whisper stepped forward, his white coat dazzling under the noon Sunday. He halted square in front of Hale and lowered his head until his breath steamed against the man's polished boots. Hale froze, color draining from his face. Whisper snorted, loud and contemptuous, then swung his head toward Nathan, pressing his muzzle gently to the boy's shoulder. The crowd erupted, not in fear, but in a sound like applause, boots stomping, hands clapping, voices rising. "Maybe law is more than ink," someone shouted. "Maybe truth stands on 4 legs," another cried. Ethan raised his hands. "Neighbors, no horse forges treaties, no boy invents signatures. This valley has water enough for all, but only if we honor what's already promised." His voice cracked with the force of memory battlefields, broken vows, all the waste he'd carried. "We don't need more graves to prove who was right. We need justice." The square swelled with voices, louder, firmer. Some were still cautious, but enough had shifted that even Hale saw it. His smile faltered into something brittle. He tried to shout them down, but the tide had turned. People were speaking not from rumor but from memory of trades made, debts paid, trust given and returned. Sheriff Hawkins appeared on the edge of the crowd, his hat pulled low. He met Ethan's gaze, across the throng, gave a single curt nod, and did not interfere. That, more than words, told Ethan the balance had tilted. As the sun slid lower, Reverend Mays closed the gathering with a prayer, his voice ringing with conviction. "Let mercy walk beside truth," he intoned, "and may justice ride like the wind." When he lowered his hand, silence lingered, then broke into scattered cheers. On the wagon home, Martha's eyes shone, though her lips stayed pursed. "They listened," she said at last. "Not all, but enough." Nathan held the basket in his lap, stroking the weave with reverent fingers. Whisper walked beside the wagon, his stride loose, his head high. He turned once to look back at the town, and Ethan swore the stallion's gaze held something like triumph. The valley was still dangerous. The army would not vanish. Hale would not forgive. But for the first time, they were not alone. Their voices had joined a chorus, and even winter could not silence it. Snowmelt trickled from the eaves in bright rivulets, each drop striking the ground with the soft certainty of spring. The valley had begun to shed winter's iron grip, and with it came a cautious calm, fragile as glass yet undeniably present. Ethan stood on the porch, mug warming his hands, and watched the world transform. Patches of brown earth peeked through the white, and the air carried a faint scent of pine sap and thawed soil. For the first time in months, the silence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a promise. Inside, Martha bustled with a vigor that belied her years, sweeping floors that did not need sweeping, humming hymns that cracked at the edges but never lost heart. Nathan sat at the table with a Bible open before him, his finger tracing lines Martha had insisted he practice each morning. His English had grown steadier, his words sure where once they stumbled. He looked up when Ethan entered, eyes brighter than the fire that burned in the hearth. "We are still here," Nathan said simply. His voice carried pride, but also wonder, as if the survival of this small household had been stitched together by something greater than luck. Ethan nodded. "And not just here. They listened, they saw. That matters more than rifles." Nathan reached beneath his coat and withdrew the satchel. The treaty still rested inside, edges softened by many hands but intact, unburned, unbroken. He set it gently on the table. "This will go to Denver," he said. Reverend Mays promised. "With more eyes, more voices, it will not vanish." Martha crossed her arms, her expression softening despite her attempt at sternness. "And until then, this house will keep standing, with or without Hale's bluster." A soft whinny drifted through the window. Whisper stood in the corral, head high, mane stirring in the breeze. His coat, once ragged with ice and exhaustion, now shone like hammered silver under the weak Sunday. He had carried them through storm, through rumor, through fury, and now, in peace, he still stood guard, as if unable to imagine life without vigilance. Nathan rose and went to him, boots crunching over damp earth. Ethan followed, Martha not far behind. The stallion greeted Nathan first, lowering his head so the boy's palm could rest against his muzzle. Then he shifted, extending the same courtesy to Ethan and finally to Martha, whose laugh came out startled and tender when his warm breath puffed against her cheek. "He's claimed us," Ethan said, voice rough with something that wasn't quite laughter. "Or we claimed him," Martha answered. "Hard to tell who chose who anymore." Nathan turned, his dark eyes fierce with quiet conviction. "Family," he said. The word hung in the air, stronger than any treaty, broader than any bloodline. Ethan felt it settle into him, binding him to this boy, this woman, this horse. It wasn't the family he'd lost, but it was the family he'd been given, and sometimes, he thought, that was the greater miracle. That evening, they ate together while the last of the snow melted into the yard. Martha's bread steamed, filling the cabin with the smell of yeast and home. Nathan read a line of scripture haltingly but with determination, his accent shaping the words into something both old and new. Ethan listened, the crackle of the fire behind them, and felt a peace he had not believed himself capable of. After supper, he stepped onto the porch. Stars pricked the sky, clear and countless, and the valley lay wide and waiting. Whisper stood near the barn, ears flicking, his silhouette cut against the heavens. Ethan raised his cup in a quiet toast. "For carrying him here," he said softly, "for carrying all of us." Nathan joined him, wrapping a blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Storm brought me to your door," he said, his English deliberate. "But you opened it." Ethan's throat closed with emotion he didn't bother to hide. He set a hand on the boy's shoulder, grounding them both. Martha came to the doorway, her eyes misted but her voice brisk. "Don't catch cold out there, the two of you. Tomorrow's work waits for no man or horse." They laughed, and the sound rolled warm into the night. For a moment, the valley seemed to breathe with them, as though it too knew something had shifted. The shadows would always linger Hale's resentment, the army's interest, the endless grind of progress against tradition. But within this small circle of firelight and faith, there was strength enough to meet whatever came. Whisper tossed his head and stamped once, then settled, his breath rising like a prayer into the starlit dark. Ethan closed his eyes, listening, and for the first time in years, the silence around him felt like home. If this story touched your heart, let us know. Just drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments. Your words remind us that these stories matter. And don't forget to subscribe, because the bond between people and animals is endless, and the next story may move you even deeper than this one. Stay with us. More heartfelt journeys are waiting for you.